Being and Caring, A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by The Happy President. Part 1, Foundations. Chapter 5, Choice and Responsibility. When I pay attention to how my actions affect other people, I open the door to making the world around me more agreeable and a little more benevolently disposed toward me. When I handle an encounter with another person, be it in business, romance, parenting, or anything else, in a way that leaves him or her feeling belittled, cheated, or deceived, I'm likely to meet mistrust and trouble. In this form of recycling, each of us is touched by the effects of almost everything we do. We create a web of opportunities and obstacles for ourselves. Our temperaments, early learnings, and environments provide materials, but we ourselves are the architects, general contractors, carpenters, and stonemasons of our lives. We choose what to build and how to build it, as local representatives of the karmic construction company. Responsibility and self-support. Ordinarily, the word responsibility is synonymous with accountability, but there's another equally important meaning. Pearls separates the word into two parts, response, ability. In this often forgotten dimension, it means the ability to respond, to be alive, to feel, to be sensitive. It doesn't just mean obligation or duty, especially not in the sense of something I've been directed to do without involvement, so that I do it automatically without thinking, like a robot rather than a person. Growth in these terms is a move from letting others be responsible for me to taking responsibility for myself. Beyond dependency. In our adult lives, as we discover how we still hang on to some of our helpless childhood ways so that the people around us will do things for us, we move from manipulating others for support toward developing self-support. This shift is a central element in maturity. A relationship is enriching and satisfying when both people share the responsibility for clearly stating what they want and sharing what they have to give. Dependency in such a relationship, where one person is always in charge and the other is always passive, may be a turn-on in some instances, but it seldom provides a basis for long-term satisfaction. This is an especially important issue for women who occupy roles commonly viewed as dependent. Husbands let their wives do things, and the wives give their husbands the power to regulate large areas of their lives. Keeping a person dependent can cause hostility, especially when double messages are involved. I may say, for instance, I want you to go out and do something on your own, while my actions tell you loudly that I want you to depend on me. And what's more, I'll give you lots of approval if you do depend on me. We observe this process frequently between parent and child, employer and employee, husband and wife, and in other ongoing relationships. When I assign the cause of my behavior to you, to my unconscious, to my parents or my past, I make it difficult for me to change. If my parents did it to me, they are the ones who must undo it if it's to be undone. If they're gone out of my life, presumably I'm stuck with what they did. It's all their fault. Recognizing my responsibility for myself doesn't mean I have to give up being any way I am or doing anything I do. It does mean that I need to stop believing that I act in these ways only because of my ancient history. Each day, I choose to act in the ways I do. Responsibility and authenticity. Responsibility and freedom are related to self-determination and authenticity. I can be authentic only to the degree that I make my own choices about who I am and what I do, including choosing those times when I'm willing to go along with what others want from me. Choosing the path of least resistance, the one laid out by others and circumstances, is a choice too. Actually, even when I'm following orders, I decide whether I'll do as ordered or risk doing otherwise. As Sartre pointed out, what is not possible is not to choose. If I do not choose, I am still choosing. To forget that I discover, create, and maintain the conditions of my life leads to alienation, the feeling that I have no control over my own destiny, that I'm a pawn moved by the hands of the unseen they who sit in seats of power. But as I regain my sense of being the doer, the thinker, the feeler, my life becomes my own, and I reclaim the power that is rightfully my own. The effects of our social environments. Each of us is born into a historical period, a race, a culture, a rich family or a poor one, and a neighborhood. No matter what personal transformations we undergo, these elements are part of our personal history. But there is a difference between speaking of responsibility for our life situation and responsibility for how we are in our life situation. In some cases, there may not be much I can do about my situation at this moment. But even in that case, I have choices about how I wish to be in that situation. Within the limits set by my environment, I can choose how I let the forces around me influence me. Deliberately or by default, I can select the way I am wherever I am. When I'm in New York City, I begin to talk and move a little faster than when I'm in the country. The very vibrations of the city affect me. Still, I stay true to myself. When I was growing up in New York, I chose never to rush for a subway train. After all, another train would pull in soon. As I walked down the station steps, people invariably pushed by me to get to that train. But I knew that I didn't have to let the rhythm of the subway become the rhythm of my life. If, however, like Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, I live by an ageless, ever-flowing river and choose to live with that river, I can let its voices slowly seep into my being. The river can be the flow of the lives of the people around me, and their voices can seep into my being. Some elements of my world open doors to the fuller, richer ways of living and experiencing, while others close them. Next time you watch television, be sensitive to how the program or commercial manipulates your thoughts and feelings. Much of that is intentional, with objectives different from your own. You're making all those things you watch, read, and listen to part of your existence. With them, and with other places where you spend your time, you can ask yourself, do I want to make that part of me? The question has both a personal and a political aspect. How am I affected by my environment? And what's in it for my environment to have me accept the messages it's giving me? Many of our social institutions seem to want me to be available for ready manipulation. If I feel inadequate about making my own decisions, I give up my power, my responsibility, and my right to define who I am to big business, the media, government agencies, and other influential groups. As I discover how my social environment wants me to be and why, I can more wisely choose which of its elements I want to incorporate into my life and which I don't. Actions and experience. To others, I am what I do and say. My acts, and how others view them, define me in my world. To myself, I am also what I think and feel, my intentions and urges that determine my actions. I am what I do. At the height of a battle, a soldier runs out into the line of fire to help his wounded buddy. The next day, he sits in his shelter all day long. From moment to moment and day to day, he chooses whether to act in a way called brave. That same soldier is 6 feet tall. He was 6 feet tall yesterday, and he'll be 6 feet tall tomorrow. He can't choose to be 5'7" instead. In the same way, a table is a table and can't choose to become something else. This illustrates Jean-Paul Sartre's distinction between an action and an attribute. 6 feet tallness and tableness are attributes. They can't be changed. Bravery is different. It's based on actions. There's no such thing as a brave man, declares Sartre. If a man usually acts bravely, that's all we can say. To others, his acts define him. Man is nothing else than the ensemble of his acts, nothing else than his life. Suppose I'm in a heated argument with a member of my family, and then the phone rings. When I pick up the receiver, it's a friend with good news. My whole mood changes. Instead of being angry, suddenly I become agreeable. What happened? I allowed myself to be angry, then I made myself agreeable. I choose how I want to be. My authenticity depends on it. When I live with the idea that I'm a sad person or a coward or whatever, I blind myself to the fact that I create these ways of thinking and feeling about myself. As I recognize that I could discover other ways to act and feel, I gain a greater measure of choice. Here's a way to pay attention to how you create and maintain your ways of feeling and behaving. As you are going through a day, you are constantly describing yourself to others and to yourself. Notice how you do this. What favorite stories do you reel off again and again, and what do they tell you about who you are? Who talks to you about their feelings, and which of those feelings sound like your own? How is the music you listen to like you? How much of the information you select helps keep you where you are, and how much of it helps you move on? Sometimes our self-images are statements of who and what we are that help us avoid facing what our actions paint us as. If I'm trying to be my illusion of who I am, I may not want to be aware of who I actually am. I cut out my silhouette of illusion with sharp scissors of denial. The Scrooge in me may rationalize, my deeds don't represent me, I'm good at heart, and that's what counts. But no matter how I may claim that my deeds don't represent me, in fact, they do. Though I may claim that I can't act otherwise, in fact, I can. I am what I experience. To hear from you how your world is for you can be very different from defining how you are in my terms. Such a knowing opens dialogue and provides a new access to each other. Suppose there is a depressed woman standing here beside me. To her, your faces might look like closed doors. The room seems narrow and repressive. People are like a blur, gray and uninviting. She's in this room in a way different from the way I'm here. If we assume that she and I are in the same room, we make a mistake. Being sensitive to another's experience is especially important with children. Unless I truly hear my child's concerns, joys, hopes, and fears in his or her terms, I'm likely to misunderstand and respond inappropriately. Both our observable actions and our inner experiences are related to other currents in our personalities, conscious and unconscious, to which we now turn. Intention and volition. With our intentions, we formulate our values, construct our behavior, and define our ways of approaching or withdrawing to get or be what we want. In their theory of positive intent, Luthman and Kirschenbaum point to a deep level of intentionality in which we want to be secure, to feel good, to love and be loved, and to express ourselves in our own ways. But if I've been chastised for expressing my deep desires or convictions, or have been rewarded for words or actions that contradicted them, I may learn to behave in ways that subvert essential personal truths. This accounts for many of the self-defeating, self-negating patterns that seem so inexplicable. Diane, for instance, has many good ideas, but when the time comes to speak up, she stays silent. Her surface intention to speak up is sabotaged by the habits she learned as a child, when the message she got was, "Be quiet. Family time is a time for the adults to talk." Her middle-level intention is to avoid being punished for speaking up. After all these years, she is still using Daddy's wrath to silence herself. Her deeper intention is to maintain family harmony and win her father's approval. Her middle-level intention interferes with that deep intention as well as her surface one, for it impedes the success in school and work that would please both her and her father. As social psychologist Harold H. Kelly points out, we all recognize that various intentions may underlie what others do. As described in detail in Chapter 8, our responses depend on the intentions we attribute to other people. I may feel upset, indifferent, or pleased about something you do, depending on why I think you did it. The same is true in our assessment of our own behavior. This doesn't contradict the fact that many actions have predictable effects regardless of the intentions that led to them. It's useful to distinguish the act of forming an intention from the act of carrying it out. How commonly we say of someone, "He has good intentions, but..." So I define intention as conceiving of, at some level of awareness, what I wish to do, and volition as mobilizing the energy to carry out an intention and doing so. Unconscious choices and intentions. The term unconscious, writes Rollo May, refers to conscious material denied, repressed, or forgotten, to underlying irrational impulses and spontaneous urges, to possibilities that we somehow sense or experience only in a vague way. Recognizing that our unconscious as well as our conscious life is at some level intentional implies that we can no longer use "I did it unconsciously" to excuse our behavior. In a similar vein, Sartre declares, "The existentialists will never agree that a sweeping passion is a ravaging torrent which fatally leads a person to certain acts and is therefore an excuse." When my intentions and volitions derive from a fuller dialogue with myself, I am less likely to do things today that I will regret tomorrow. I'm likely to do things that are in accord with my own nature and that are responsive to the needs of others in my world. Then my subconscious me and my conscious me start to talk to each other, get along better, and use each other's resources. Do you promise yourself that someday you'll work on things you need to work on in your life? Do you expect someone else, a psychologist, social worker, friend, or minister, to solve your problems for you? Do you let the expectations of people in your past define what you can and can't do for yourself today? What do you need to do to be good to yourself? How do you avoid asking yourself that question? Once you've asked it, how do you answer? By avoidance or by doing something for yourself? How is avoidance a way of doing something for yourself? I can readily describe how things are done to me that change my life. Viewing myself as though I were an object, I feel manipulated and powerless, as if my life is determined by outside events and others' expectations. Steve Gaskin writes, "I used to drink and drive a lot and get in a lot of wrecks. I began to figure out that it wasn't like an accident at all, It was something that I bought, asking for it. When I trace my problems back to their source, it almost always turns out that, in some way, I chose them. If I apologize for being alive, people will treat me as though I have no right to be here. And if I ask for something as though I don't expect to get it, the chances are I won't." The way I ask a question tells the other person what kind of answer I expect. I can ask for something in a way that makes it easy to reply. I might say, "It's all right if I," isn't it? Or, "What can you tell me about?" Or, "Do you have any?" Or, "Do you know?" Whether I get a yes or no often depends on which response I ask for. In my daily life, I can give myself at least as much consideration as I give others. I don't have to set myself up to be a victim. When I asked to move to another counseling office, I said to myself, I better check the new place. Then I thought, no, the man who's asking me to move knows what I need. I made one feeble attempt to get a key, didn't get it, and gave up trying. After the movers had moved my things, I finally saw the office. It was terrible, so noisy I couldn't carry on a conversation. I'd been done to, and I was angry, just as angry at allowing myself to get done to as getting done to. That was just one event, and ultimately I got a satisfactory office. Some people live a major share of their lives committed to the victim position. I felt constantly victimized, writes Levon. My relationships were dominated by my self-fulfilling prophecy that no one could ever love me. Without realizing it, I was very successful at manipulating people into rejecting me. I didn't realize that I chose to feel hurt and dominated, and that I invited others to victimize me. Now I'm working to change that, and I've stopped blinding myself with self-pity. Whatever I'm doing, I'm creating a whole mood, whether it be a vigorous, lively one, or a shoulder-slumping droopiness. If I look pugnacious, I'll probably intimidate some people and get into fights with others. If I come on like a doormat, I'm likely to get walked on. My way of presenting myself creates the context for my relationships. Blaming others. How often and how automatically many of us place responsibility outside ourselves when something goes wrong. It wasn't my fault. I couldn't help it. Democrats and Republicans do it all the time. It's easy to see how it all gets started. But Billy did it first, Johnny protests, or it was Susie's idea. The understanding parent replies, "Oh, okay, but behave yourself next time." By accepting that excuse, the understanding parent is teaching him to believe that he doesn't have to be responsible for what he does. Blame, on the other hand, breeds resentment. "It's your fault" is a red flag phrase that invites defensiveness and argument. The hook in blame is lodged in that smidgen of truth in what you said or implied. I can seldom say, "I had absolutely nothing to do with it." When a person's blamer goes to work, it's very canny. It knows exactly where to go zap, where to pick out that nasty kernel of truth, however tiny it may be. A talented put-down artist is expert at zeroing in on where you feel inadequate and making you feel even smaller there. As long as I defend where you attack and blame, you control the action. I'm on the defensive. But I can protect myself against your blaming and others by remembering that I am not obliged to accept anyone else's evaluation of me. As counselor Norman Bryce points out, when I depend on what others think of me, I'm vulnerable to being made to feel bad by every ill-dispositioned person I happen to meet. There are few of us, says Bryce, who have the presence of mind to say, "Oh no, that's your truth. That's not the truth." To let go of long-standing habits of blaming is no easy task. As my wife will readily attest, I've been working on it for years. Blaming is hard to give up, partly because it often serves as a distraction. I can blame you in order to divert attention from an issue you've raised or to distract myself from my own concerns that I'm uneasy about dealing with. For example, I blame you for leaving your dirty dishes on the table when my real issue is how I'm feeling exploited and not cared about, and I don't feel safe telling you how I feel. It's such a touchy area. Even when I tell you in a clean, non-blaming way how I feel in response to something you did, sometimes you'll probably still feel blamed. Also, when I'm angry, I can be doing my best not to blame you and still sound as if I'm blaming. I'll do no one any good by blaming myself for blaming you. But I can stay as aware as I can of what I'm doing and as open as I can to how you feel in response. Self-blame. I'm apt to blame myself most heavily in those areas where I feel the least adequate. I'm such a nerd that there's nothing I can do. I'm helpless. Using pseudo-self-blame in this way is a device to avoid responsibility. I'm not blaming myself. I'm blaming the circumstances or people in my past that made me as I am. When I acknowledge some of my responsibility for my own troubles, I can no longer use my presumed helplessness or inadequacy to distract myself from doing anything to change. I can tell myself, I got into this. Now I can get out of it and into a situation I'll feel better about. Teresa has yet to take that step. She describes herself as a total failure socially. When people see her coming, they walk away. She admits that she does nothing to involve herself with others, but uses that to say, "You see how inadequate I am?" This self-fulfilling statement of her helplessness is a way of saying to herself and her world, "See, I'm incapable of doing otherwise." But I don't have to let my self-blame stop me cold. When my teenage daughter saved her money for a mini bike, I said, "I don't like them, they're noisy, etc., but if that's what you want, I'm not going to stop you." Then I heard myself throwing roadblock after roadblock in her path. I thought, that's a dirty trick. I don't want you to have the bike, but I don't want you to think I'm stopping you. So I try to manipulate you into thinking it's too much bother and you didn't really want it anyway. I went through the process of blaming myself. I had a choice there. I could have said, "Too bad, I'm so defective I can't do anything about it." Instead, I said, "I don't want to leave it there." I talked with her again and changed things, clearly taking responsibility for what I'd done. But, oh how I hate mini bikes. We seldom know enough to be sure of what's going to happen as a result of what we do. We can only guess, assume, and hope. At this moment, under these circumstances, with the knowledge I have now, I make my choice. I live with its results. Mistakes are familiar mice in everybody's cornfield. If I think as clearly and act as honestly and wisely as I can, that's enough. We can decrease our self-aggravation and suffering by learning to take our mistakes, failures, and half-successes as a texture in our lives. My errors and defeats sometimes teach me more than my successes. In that important sense, they aren't failures at all. What's yours and what's mine? Some years ago, I arranged the purchase of 145 acres of forest land. I bought a plot for myself, and friends bought the rest in parcels of 10 to 15 acres each. Had I not set up the deal, none of us would live there now. That responsibility was mine. But since then, we've each done our own thing. Some of us have built simple dwellings, others expensive ones. One person uses his land for a rhododendron nursery. If I wished, I could view the whole thing as my doing. In fact, it's not. In most cases, what happens between you and me results from what we both do. You anger yourself, feel hurt, feel good, etc. in response to my words and actions. I can't all by myself make you angry, hurt your feelings, or make you feel good. You've got to be willing to use my input to go to one of those places. Usually, the most I can do is create the situation. Yet try this. For the next 10 seconds, don't think about watermelons. See what's happening? Anything I say or do has the potential to set up a train of associations in your mind. If I know you well enough to be pretty sure where you'll go in response to what I say, and I go ahead and say it, I'm sending you there. In the many instances when I don't know how you'll respond to what I say or do, however, I take responsibility only for my wants and actions. I have no responsibility for or control over your response. Likewise, how I feel in response to what you do is my own doing, not yours. Even when I have to deal with difficulties you cause me, it's within my power to maintain a creative state of mind. I don't have to get in my own way by making myself miserable and thereby making life even harder. Only I can do it. A monk asked, "How does one get emancipated?" The master said, "Who has ever put you in bondage?" D.T. Suzuki. We often say, "I can't," when the truth is, I won't. I can't quit injuring myself, can't stop abusing other people, can't cut down my spending, and so on. It's a handy dodge. This can't seems to make life easier, fixing things so I don't need to put out as much effort. I'm not responsible. I can't do it, that's all. I try can be another cop-out. Often, if I want something badly enough, I can do it. On the face of it, I tried means I did everything I could but didn't succeed. It implies I can't. Actually, it more often helps me to disown my responsibility for not putting out the energy and commitment it takes to accomplish the objective in question. Perhaps I didn't want to do it badly enough to do it, but I don't want to admit that. In this regard, the Spanish language reaches a delightfully absurd point. The English sentence, "I missed the bus," for example, translates into Spanish as, "The bus left me." El camión me dejó. Or if I don't manage to succeed at something, in Spanish I might remark, "The project didn't get itself off the ground." El proyecto no se levantó. I can't fix you up. Neither can your counselor. Your door of opportunity doesn't open with an electric eye. Some people have more handicaps than others, but everyone has at least a few. I think here of my friend and colleague Anne. Anne was born with severe cerebral palsy. Her distorted words came slowly and with difficulty. She moved her limbs in spasmodic jerks. During her early years, she was considered severely mentally retarded. Her parents put her in an institution, but she refused to stay. Brought home, she insisted on going to school. So Anne, who was not a pretty girl, went to school and suffered many jibes and jokes, but also got support and appreciation for her strength. She went through high school and college. I met her when she asked to be an intern at the school for handicapped children I directed. Her internship included psychometrics, psychological testing, curriculum design, and parent consultation. She was one of my best interns. In ways that we may not even recognize, most of us contribute to larger events of this world. I uphold or confront the law as I pay or withhold my taxes. I help maintain our society by being the consumer I am. I abdicate my power by withdrawing completely into my private concerns and avoiding involvement in my community, or exercise it by working for issues that I think are important and for candidates of integrity who support them. End of chapter 5.